Dave, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you write about.
So I'm a 30-year veteran from Wall Street and Silicon Valley. I was an investment banker for a long, long time, for almost 25 years, working with internet companies. And then I became an entrepreneur, started a bunch of companies, and also have been a pretty active angel investor. So I've been investing in a variety of different technology companies as well.
Nice. I think I saw on your website you're in the dozens for how many companies you started. Is that right?
I've started a total of 4 companies, but
Okay.
I've invested in over a dozen. And
There we go.
uh, what I do is I'm very active with the companies I invest in. So I'm typically either a chairman, vice chairman, or lead board member of those companies.
Gotcha. And do you write about investment and entrepreneurship as well?
So I do. So I do a couple things. I have a blog where I actually give career advice, primarily to disadvantaged groups like Asian Americans. That column is called Breaking Bamboo. And then I recently wrote a book that's going to be published by Wiley in November, called The Way of the Wall Street Warrior: Conquer the Corporate Game Using Tips, Tricks, and Smart Cuts. And it's
Awesome.
essentially an irreverent, humorous book that outlines how I was able to climb the corporate ladder. And it's my way of giving back to the community by sharing some of the tips and tricks that work for me and hopefully can work for other people, particularly people that feel disadvantaged in some ways. So for women, for minorities, for disabled people, I'm hopeful that they can pick up a couple of good tricks and tips out of my book.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on that publishing deal. Really excited for you for that.
Thank
And
you.
thinking about your writing process and going back to that first day where you first sat down at the computer, what were some of the struggles that you had along the way that maybe prevented you from getting started or prevented you from getting to that finished draft without any sort of hurdles?
So the biggest thing that I struggled with was actually the fear of the unknown. I'm a first time author, never written a book before, and obviously I've read a lot of books, and the whole mystery around how someone creates such a voluminous piece of content, was always really intriguing to me, and frankly a little scary. And so when I signed my publishing deal, and I still remember after I signed it, I was like, "Oh man, what did I just sign up for?" Because now I got to deliver like a manuscript, and in my situation, I had 4 months to deliver a finished book. So I think there was just a tiny bit of paralysis right away, thinking like, "What did I get myself into, and how am I going to accomplish this goal?" So I
hmm
think that was probably the first thing. I would say it's like a mega writer's block, but then I developed a few things that really worked well for me to get past that.
Nice, 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 nice. And before we dive into those, quick question about kind of that writing timeline that you had. Because you had so many blog posts already written, you had experience as a blogger. Did that help? Did you have some content already done, or did you have to totally start from scratch?
I had a lot of content in my head because it was a career book, and it was lightly autobiographical. So there was definitely a lot of things that I wrote about that were my own experience, and I knew the stories I wanted to incorporate in the book. The anecdotes. What I didn't really have at the time was the third party backing, if you will, or validation. So the way my book kind of came together was, I would start with a tip or trick, and then I would validate that with other successful people, and show that, hey, they did kind of something similar to what I did, and they too succeeded. And then kind of the last layer of validation was I would pull from science. So I would pull from things related to human behavior and Nobel Prize winning research to then validate that this tip, even though you may think it only worked for me, there's actually some underlying science behind it. So that process of coming up with the idea, the tip or trick, and then validating it with a third party interview, and also third party references and science, that took a long time. So I needed to kind of get my arms around like how I was going to actually do that.
Absolutely. Now you mentioned those strategies that helped you go from blank page to final draft, and I'm taking it that that was one of them, right? Is having that validation piece. What were some other things that were really helpful in getting you to that finished manuscript?
Yeah, so one of the things that really helped a lot is actually was something I learned in my creative writing classes. I wrote a nonfiction book, but I took some classes in fiction, and this process of reverse outlining was super helpful. And what that was, and the way I did it was I would actually start with an outline of the whole book. I would outline my whole book is 30 chapters, so I outline all 30 chapters, and I would write down, you know, all the key points that I wanted to make in the book, and who I thought might be helpful to interview, and then what was the what was the scientific basis behind each one of those tips. And so I had an outline for the whole book, and I had outline for each of the 30 chapters, and that was actually very cathartic, because by seeing it all in totality, I go, okay, now I have a map, right? Now I know like where my journey is going to go. And now I can start, you know, cutting this down into little bite sizes. You know, I live by the adage that any large problem is just a bunch of little problems. So I took a large problem, which was I got to deliver a book in 4 months, and parse it into 30 small problems. And then I wrote each of those chapters, and where the reverse outlining was super helpful is after I would finish a chapter, I would look at my outline again for that chapter, and then revise the outline and make sure that I was hitting all the key points I wanted. And if I wasn't, then I would go back and redo or edit that chapter. So this idea of like having the draft of the chapter and then the outline, and then going back and forth and iterating was super helpful in helping me just kind of like massage and get to the piece of content that I wanted. And I had 30 of these. And then obviously when you aggregated them all, that ultimately became the finished book.
I love that tip. I've never heard of that process before. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it was super helpful. It's actually a tactic that a lot of fictional writers use. Because a lot of times with fiction, you're telling a story and you're not exactly sure where your story is going to go. Like, you know, the big fork in the road is always like, does my protagonist die or does he live? Right. And so just this whole idea of like doing reverse outlining is I think a pretty well established tool in fictional writing. And I found it super helpful in my nonfiction work.
Absolutely. Now, going back to kind of the mindset piece, I know you said when you first got that deadline, you're like, oh my God, I have 4 months to turn in this whole book. Did that hard deadline end up being helpful for you in terms of motivation, or was it still kind of always this looming thing for you?
No, it was super helpful. You know, I think you know, my book is a lot of it draws from human psychology and research around that. And you know, having a deadline creates constraints, and generally people do better actually when there are constraints. When there are no constraints, they tend to dissipate and they tend to waste their resources. And in this situation, is obviously time. So working backwards, knowing that I needed to develop a entire book in 4 months, I kind of worked backward, and it ended up being a little bit like a mile marker, or, you know, time clock, where I could look at the months going by and go like, okay, am I halfway done yet? I got to be halfway done, right? Because I only have 2 more months left, or I got to be, you know, 3/4 of the way done because I only have 1 more month left. And so by doing that, I was able to work backwards with simple, you know, math, and figure out, okay, how many words, how many chapters do I need to get done, you know, or at least somewhat done, you know, on a weekly basis. And so I think that the deadline, and then breaking down the deadline into individual time clocks or time series, really helped me a lot in staying on track. And there were certainly times where, you know, I had a bad week and everything I wrote was garbage, and, you know, I was slipping, but at least I knew that, okay, next week I've really got to focus, because instead of doing 1 chapter, I've got to do 2, right? So definitely having constraints of some type. And even if my publisher had not set that, which obviously they need to, I would have definitely set up my own kind of commitment device or commitment method. One of the things that I decided to do, which in hindsight was tremendously helpful if you have the resources, was in addition to the editorial staff that the publisher had, I hired my own individual co-editor and co-writing partner. And so the way that worked was I would churn out a piece of work, and then I would send it to him, and he would read it, he would edit it, and he'd send it back with comments, just like, frankly, an editor would do at a publisher. However, what worked really well was that we had a standing call, every Tuesday. And on that day, I knew, actually the day before, I knew that he was expecting some pages from me. So having that commitment to another person helped a tremendous amount in terms of keeping me on schedule, and meeting this overall 4-month deadline.
Absolutely. That accountability can be huge. So, Dave, thank you so much for all this information. Is there anything else you want to share with a first-time writer, given that you were kind of in their shoes not so long ago?
I think my overarching view now, having done this, is that it's a lot. It's a journey, like a lot of things in life, where the actual journey feels a little painful. Just like maybe exercise for a lot of people. But when you're done, there's nothing more satisfying than looking at a finished manuscript, and realizing, hey, all that stuff came from here and got down there. So I would just say, just plow through. Remember the adage, like I started with, which is every big problem is really just a bunch of little problems broken apart. And just take it one step at a time.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for all your insight.
Sure, thank you, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to share what I know.